Well, greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, as the case might be. My name is Dalibor Petrovic. I'm the founder of the Summit Leadership Alliance and the host to these TechTonic Conversations, a series of live webcasts where I'm hosting and bringing to you conversations with world-class technology experts who are sharing their wisdom, their thoughts, their perspectives, and also technology leaders who are sharing their life stories, inspirational often, to present them as genuine humans, people who have their personalities, who have their styles, who have their to have their genuine personalities sharing, and so that we can all learn from them. Today, we are continuing our Deloitte Tech Trends 2025 series of live webcasts. And this is our third year of doing so. I am thrilled to welcome a truly global panel of leaders today, as we are going to be unpacking Deloitte's Tech Trend 2025, the Tech Trend number 3, Hardware is Eating the World. As a reminder, today, on this fine Tuesday, March the 4th, 2025, we are hosting this live. That means you will have a chance to interact with our panelists using Q&A function. So if you have any questions and comments as the conversations unfold, please feel free to submit your questions to our panelists, and we'll do our best to address as many questions as we can. Now, that said, I'm going to very briefly welcome and introduce my panelists. I will start with Jim Rowan. Jim is the head of AI actually at Deloitte. Jim, thank you so much for finding time to be with us this morning.
Yeah, thank you so much. Excited to be here.
Wonderful. Next we have Jonathan Frankel, and Jonathan is the chief AI scientist at Databricks, joining us from New York. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Fantastic. Next on the panel, joining us all the way from Barcelona, Spain, is Baris Serrar. Baris is the global AI leader for technology, media, and telecom at Deloitte as well. Thank you, Baris, for finding time. Good evening to you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you very much. And lastly, Kelly Raskovich. Kelly is the executive editor of Deloitte Tech Trends and also a futurist herself. Kelly, I think we should just delve into the conversation, and maybe before I pass on the baton for you to walk us through the tech trends, maybe just a little bit about who you are and what you're working on as we take this into the meat of the session.
Let's do it. And thank you so much for having us. Yes, by way of quick introduction, my name is Kelly Raskovich, and I am the executive editor of Tech Trends, like Dalibor mentioned. And so I think through what's new and next in tech and help with our clients think through what is coming from a future perspective of technology. And that really helps think through to what do you need to do today in order to make that reality a future. Another one of my favorite roles is I'm a mom. So I have a 3-year-old at home. And one of the things I joke about is my little one was late to talking. And this past summer, when I dropped her off at school one day, her teacher was super nervous to ask me a question. She said, "Do you practice your speeches in front of a mirror?" And I was like, "No, what are you talking about?" And she's like, "Well, Riley's been talking up a storm, and she's been talking to anything and everyone, but she's been also talking to no one at all." And I thought about it and I was like, oh my gosh, she's seen me talk to you all virtually and globally and pace around the house. And she's thought, yeah, I don't need to make eye contact. I don't need to talk to anyone. I can just talk to myself or the wall. I'm happy to report that I righted that wrong. And she is making eye contact and talking to other humans. But I think that story is so powerful because technology is here. It's impacting us all, right? In our personal and professional lives. And I think there's so much happening, and it's hard to think through, one, how do you even make sense of this in a really meaningful way? And that's kind of the beauty and power of kind of tech trends. And so I am sharing my screen. Please, someone nudge me if you can't see it.
Oh, good. You can see it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So this is something we've been at for 16 years. And so we are around the clock connecting with clients, connecting with startups around what they're seeing from a technology landscape perspective, what's working and what's not, right? I think it's really easy to toot our own horns around what's going well, but a lot of times we're also connecting to say what's not quite going as expected, or what are some unintended consequences of this, and really finding ways to share light of all of that is really important. And so we do this year round. We've certainly love having this because it really helps us foundationalize kind of where are we headed, what's now new and next with all of these trends. And so kind of from a mall map perspective, Dalibor, I know this is the fourth part of this webinar series in the sense that we've had one overview trend with Mike Bechtel a few weeks ago. And then I know from a series perspective, we then take each webinar and dive into each one. So we did one on interaction a few weeks ago, one on information, and this one will all be about computation. And this trend specifically is all around hardware eating the world. And this kind of makes nod to we're seeing in a world where software has taken storm and has really been the topic du jour for a long time, we're seeing the shift to hardware and having that be strategic again. This is for a few reasons. So one, if you think about everything that's happening in that interaction and information space, there's a lot more compute that's needed to make all of that happen. And so it can't just be software as the only solution, right? We're seeing folks really have to think about this big picture, especially since the needs of all of these things are changing, and it has to be a part of a strategy long term, right? How are we going to think about edge footprint? What decisions need to be made around build versus buy? And how do we also think through things like data center sustainability? An example here is HP, for example. I know they went and they developed a method in which they are shifting their underutilized GPUs so that they can accelerate their methods and make it so it's available for those that do need it right away. And so I think this is something that is really integral into how we're thinking about it today, and it's evolving quickly. I know we have some wonderful panelists who are going to give us a little bit more detail around this, but I'm excited to dive in. I know this will be a lively discussion, and we'll certainly link to this exact trend if you want to read. There's a ton of data in it, and it's great reading, but I would be remiss if we didn't also just open up the dialogue, because a lot has changed since we published this in December of 2024 too. So I want to acknowledge that and bring on Jim first and foremost. Jim, I know AI has been the buzzword du jour for the past 2.5 years. And one of the things that you reference often is this notion of AI for business and business of AI. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and kind of how you're seeing that show up in the market?
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks for having me here again. I really appreciate it. Maybe just a little more detail on the intro too. Head of AI sounds like a nice, ambiguous title that seems like a lot of responsibilities. And I would say, definitely wouldn't put me under the AI expert title, right? I'm still learning every day about what's kind of happening in this space and trying to understand more about it. And I think sort of my job has kind of three responsibilities to it. One is working with our clients on go to market. So thinking through all this stuff that happens in the marketplace around AI. What does it mean? But what's it mean for the enterprise? What can I do with all these things I'm hearing about in the news? And how do I add value to my shareholders? So that's sort of point number one. Area number two is that Deloitte is a massive organization globally and in the US. And from a US perspective, I'm helping with the service delivery transformation. So how do you take 180,000 employees and start figuring out where do we use and deploy AI across that group to drive value for our stakeholders and shareholders? And the final piece of the job, which is pretty interesting, is innovation. So where can we look at the trends that we're seeing in the marketplace? So I got some questions for you about what you're seeing in the future here to help us understand those trends and how do we innovate for ourselves and sort of disrupt our own business as well. So it's a pretty interesting space. Obviously, a lot of excitement. And as you mentioned, we've had a lot of hype. Like a lot of the things that we've been dealing with from an AI perspective was kind of a lot of news about sort of all this investment in AI. And what we tried to do was take this look at a framework of business of AI and AI for business. And we applied that lens to what Gartner did with their AI, Gen AI value chain, sort of looking at things across from the compute, models, inferencing, decisioning, and output to kind of say to yourselves, what's actually happening in these two segments of the world? And that's a very simple view of things, but for us, it kind of helped take a look at this and narrow focus to say that there's a lot of attention in the business of AI. There's investment in the model frontier model companies. There's a ton of investment in building out infrastructure, both from the new capabilities from a chips perspective, but also from cooling and power, building out the data centers, a ton of activity there. And so that generates a lot of hype and noise in the market. We're saying we're spending a bunch of money here. But then on the AI for business side, we keep asking ourselves the question of, well, where's the value? What are we going to generate value from all these investments? When do we see it hit our impact, our bottom line? And one of the things that we see in our State of Gen AI report, sort of another parallel report running to Tech Trends, it surveys about 2,800 folks globally, is that plenty of organizations, only about 30% have seen some of their AI experiments scale to production. And so we're seeing very few solutions actually make it to production enterprise-wide. We're seeing a lot of department-specific scaling, individualized solutions that are driving some efficiency in the marketplace, but not some of the things that tie to the hype or some of the investment that you've seen out there, that you hear about maybe in the news about the amount of dollars that are being spent. So that's kind of how we use the framework and why we sort of split things up into those two categories. We're still very bullish about the possibilities of AI for sure, but just also tempered on the fact that AI seems to be moving more at the speed of normal businesses versus what we see from press releases and announcements out there in the world.
Yeah, there's a ton happening, and I think it's hard finding the thread through of like what should you focus on and not. And so I love that framing too, Jim. I think it makes it really relatable too to think through AI for business and business of AI. Okay, Jonathan, as Chief AI Scientist, can you tell us a little bit about your role, what you're seeing in this space too, and kind of some of the things that you and Databricks are up to?
Definitely. So my job responsibility, I'm a researcher, I'm a scientist at the end of the day. I build AI models, I try to understand AI models, I work with the latest techniques and try to get them into our products, into the hands of our customers. My job is to, in some sense, make magic happen. I like to say that, I like to give my product managers things they didn't even know they could offer to customers. To give you one example I've been working on lately, imagine you have a bunch of inputs for an LLM, but you have no outputs, no labels, nothing like that.
Mm-hmm.
What if you could fine tune an LLM that was really, really good at your task, even though all you have is inputs and you don't even have correct outputs? That's a product that's coming soon to Databricks. That's the kind of
Wow.
thing that, my job is to offer. I spend a lot of time with our customers trying to understand where they're running into problems with AI, where they're getting stuck in terms of trying to deploy this. And, my biggest takeaway so far is the technology is awesome. The technology is not the bottleneck at the moment. I'm not going to claim the technology is superhuman or anything remotely crazy like that. The technology is good enough. The hardest part is figuring out how to convey your intention for what you want the AI system to do in such a way that you actually get the AI system to do it and validating that it actually does what you want. That's the hard part right now. It's a product question, not necessarily a technology question.
Yeah, I think taking folks on that journey and that lead with lead is so important. And I think I love kind of your premise, and I'm sure it's very interesting working with you day in and day out. So excited to see what's to come with Databricks. So thank you for that. Barris, do you want to share a little bit about you and what you're seeing in the market?
Sure, absolutely. So again, I'm an AI and data strategy principal with Deloitte Consulting. My main responsibility is leading our AI business for TMT, both in the US and globally. And in terms of what I actually do every day, thanks to Jim's introduction, I'll just kind of build on is I do what Jim does, but take it and contextualize for TMT, which is a kind of interesting challenge because we got chip makers and sports businesses. We got venues and software companies in our business. So that contextualization actually gets a little interesting and complicated. And I think nowhere else the distinction between AI for business and business AI is so stark as in TMT. And I view it as almost like a two-speed market. We got clients who are actually in the business of AI and they're investing very heavily. All these big numbers that you get to hear in the marketplace, $600 billion spend, and that's really spent by our business of AI clients, and I would consider this phase as a bit of a picks and shovels phase, because without that type of infrastructure, it's hard to do, find stable, reliable, robust products that enterprises can safely and securely take and implement and start solving their business problems. And so that market is moving really, really fast. And Jonathan obviously is in a business that's at the heart of that. And our enterprise clients are looking at this, and they're also proceeding with great enthusiasm, but a little bit more cautiously. They're also trying to understand, to your earlier point, Kelly, what are some of the sensible build versus buy decisions? How should they think about cost? How should they think about talent and processes? And I think some of these considerations are getting in the way of making faster progress, but it's all par for the course, in my opinion. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, you've got to go through that journey, I think, and make sure you're building with folks and making those decisions. So that's huge. I know, kind of as part of the two previous panels, which I know you guys weren't on, but we talked a lot about spatial and AI and how that's evolving. How does that factor into kind of all of the compute needs you're seeing today and what that means for scaling and performance? Anyone can take that.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in for a second, just as we think about it. So one of the things that, and I think Jonathan had on this too, like you got to sort of find what are the right use cases we're trying to solve for, where we're going to apply, like what we're trying to solve for, and then we'll match the technology for it. I think we've been chasing some of the spatial computing areas for a little while now. The AR, VR, we've been trying to find use cases for them. Like the technology seems very novel and interesting, but we keep trying to say like, well, where do we try to fit this in? And what I'm seeing in the market is that we've got to be very specific with our clients about where to apply this capability. And it's also this area around like the explosion of the data that we're collecting. So I don't think we've been looking at all of this data to collect. In some cases, some organizations have, some haven't. And so it's really put the focus on how organizations are thinking about their overall enterprise data strategy, spatial data being one of the areas that they need to collect information on. But thinking about more broadly, what are they collecting? How are we going to use the data that we're collecting? How are we labeling, tagging it, cleaning it, depending on the sources that we get from it, understanding its protected uses rights, all those things that go into like figuring out what data you can use has been a big focus for organizations. And so I think this is like one layer of that. But I'm sure, Jonathan and Barris spend a little more time like directly with some of the clients that are using this day to day in terms of what they're seeing for, applicable use cases.
Yeah, I genuinely haven't seen spatial come up at all. To me, it's more of a buzzword than it is an actual trend that I see happening anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think as a buzzword, it has been around for quite a while now. I think what may be fundamentally shifting right now is that, let's say you got use cases that require data collection in tremendous amounts on the edge. Now you have to make sure that there's proper connectivity at a reasonable cost. You don't want to push all this data back to a centralized location. So is there an opportunity to process that on the edge, which assumes that there's a good enough compute that's placed on the edge closer to where the data is. And that also starts addressing some privacy issues. And if you want to bring more intelligence to the edge, you want to make sure that your models can actually run at that point. So I think the underlying infrastructures coming together, where in terms of enterprise adoption, we're probably in the very early innings. In other words, as a kind of technology, it's maturing as an actual use case that drives business value. It's probably got some ways to go, as Jonathan suggested.
Maybe to be a little more direct, I mean, people love to talk about these as trends or buzzwords. And, my understanding is VR was quite an exciting thing in the 90s from what people talked about. It sounds like it was quite an exciting thing 10 years ago. It sounds like it's quite an exciting thing now. Nuclear fusion was quite an exciting thing in the 90s, and it's quite an exciting thing now. We can talk about this technology for a very long time. Someday the world may be ready for it, but I haven't seen any evidence that today's that day.
And if I might add a question for all of us to ponder, given, of course, today's topic is about hardware is coming back as a strategic investment, I would like to ask the panel, what do you think is the most exciting thing that is happening on that hardware front where do you feel is the biggest gap slash opportunity in that hardware on the hardware side, and like what do you feel is driving that?
Yeah, let me maybe throw a few things out there. I think we're seeing, and again, we haven't seen the results, but we're seeing the desire to experiment with new form factors. I think that's one. The
Mm-hmm.
second thing is there's a push to get AI to the edge, and robotics is an example of that. Wearables, to Jonathan's point, smart glasses, for example, had a few false starts. I think we can go back to 2016 or 17. There was one
Yep.
period of intense excitement, and then it's kind of died away, and then it's making a comeback again. And now we're seeing some consumer traction for smart glasses, for example.
Mm-hmm.
There've been a few, I would argue, failed experiments around form factors. You tap it, it's a tiny little thing you put on your, like a lapel pen and things like that. So that experimentation is happening. What that's going to lead to, we'll see, but there's at least an attempt to change the form factors that we're engaging with. The other interesting development is pushing AI processing to the edge. Certain PC manufacturers, they came up with AI PCs. There are attempts to put AI on the edge all the way to mobile phones, which is really interesting because if you think about it, if you take a 70 billion parameter model and try to put it on a mobile phone with 128 gigabyte capacity, well, you're just storing the model there, takes all of your storage capacity, right? So there's a lot of engineering and optimization that needs to happen. And then the question becomes, do you really need to do this? And then that starts a search for use cases. So some of it is, I would say, technology innovation and novel solutions. And obviously for these things to really take off, there has to be either end user traction or specific use cases that could only be solved by such technology. So I would say compute on the edge and the ability to drive AI on the edge. And then some form factor experiments are probably the two areas that are net new, because the last decade, it was all about cloud and there was pretty much nothing else. Now people are taking a step back and looking at a more hybrid architecture and see if that solves meaningful business problems and can be monetized. And once we find the answer to that, I think we're going to know whether we've succeeded or this was just another phase of high enthusiasm followed by a trough.
So
Yeah, I
what
think.
I was
Sorry,
going to say
go for
what
it.
you're saying is there seems to be a dual attack in terms of investment. One is the investment in the back-end infrastructure, data centers, but then you said in addition to that, there is also a clear push to continue investment in edge computing, which I am translating as computers that have AI enabled technologies within them, so you can be off the grid or make calculations right there, and that is now a real possibility, it sounds, and that will logically continue into AI devices, including wearable devices. So there will be a AI capability. It sounds to me like AI capabilities on your personal devices that you hold in your hands, which was just unimaginable rewind 3 years ago, right?
Right.
And at the same time, there's gigantic investments in establishing massive data centers that will be continuing to provide computation for the cloud platforms, I guess. Is that a good way to think about it?
Yes, I think that's right. And it's not necessarily either or. It's a question
Both.
of what is the right place to process data or compute AI or run the AI workloads. Is it edge or is it cloud? I think that's becoming an opportunity. And look, I'll give you an example. One of our clients, they provide cooling and power to data centers, and they have a field workforce of 3,500 people. When these people go to data centers to fix some issue for maintenance purposes, let's call them field engineers, they're not even allowed to connect to the internet. But they want to be able to reach their knowledge base and be able to ask questions in a kind of conversational manner, which which is becoming a standard way of interacting with data, and will become all the more so. So if you have a situation like this, you got a rugged laptop and you put a language model in it, and you put your knowledge base and be able to ask questions. This is one very specific use case.
Fantastic. I do want to ask at some point, what does the panel think is the most exciting development in AI or AI enabling hardware? But I think that Jonathan, you had something that you wanted to chime in, and I think that I cut you off. So I apologize for that.
I want to push back a little bit on the edge conversation. I mean,
Mhm.
to answer the question you've just asked, I think the most exciting development is, NVIDIA chips,
Mhm.
quite frankly. AI computation is not very complicated from a computational perspective. It's just matrix multiplications, and, memory bandwidth at the end of the day. It doesn't require a very sophisticated chip, and often the hardest part is simply, having a chip that can do lots of parallel operations and having good software to be able to implement it efficiently. There are plenty of great chips for AI out there. Amazon has Trainium and Google has the TPU. The biggest thing holding these chips back is honestly the software, not the hardware. So, NVIDIA's done a phenomenal job on that front, and I think we should applaud them for simply the fact that they've built a really great software ecosystem. That software ecosystem is monumental, and to me, that's the most exciting development in AI hardware right now, because honestly, no other company has matched that, despite years of anticipation and years of trying. With respect to the edge story, I'm not one to predict the future, but I do look to the past, and I think about mobile devices previously. Siri still calls out to the cloud for just about everything. Google Maps still calls out to the cloud for just about everything, despite the fact that it might be a little bit lower latency, it might be a little more convenient if it ran on the edge device. I'm pretty skeptical based on that history that AI on the edge will be necessary outside of kind of these very niche scenarios like Barris just described, where connectivity is non-existent. The actual queries that we're sending back and forth to the AI models are much smaller than the computation that's being done. Battery life is always going to be a really important constraint. And if we're burning tons of battery life having AI models in our phone, this is kind of the trade-off we made with having compute in the cloud in general, was it's better to endure a little bit of latency and use some network connectivity than it is to burn your battery down. So from that perspective, I've heard of some niche scenarios, but I just don't think that history bears out the fact that we're going to do that much computation on the edge, despite the fact that all this computation could have happened on the edge, which with much simpler models or simply with caching data. Storage is not very expensive on mobile. We could have cached a lot of Google Maps data on our phones, but we don't seem to do that for some reason. And I don't see a reason why AI will go that direction, despite the fact that, I know vendors are pushing really hard to get AI chip capabilities available locally. I don't see why that's necessary. In the same way for the web, when we were concerned about latency, we built CDNs, we built content distribution networks that brought the data very close to you. I could see something similar happening with AI, where we bring the AI much closer to data centers, bring the data in our vector databases much closer to you, so that we can reduce the latency while still getting the benefits of not having to burn your battery over running these really expensive operations. I don't see history bearing out that trend.
Maybe so on Jonathan's point on NVIDIA and chips, I was going to go with the Chips Ahoy comment that we had in the trend line that I think is a really important story, and so I won't belabor what Jonathan's point is there. I think it's interesting what's shifting the enterprise conversation though is the access to compute capability, the access to GPU and CPU capability, the access to bandwidth and to run models, to engage with this technology. It's just been an interesting shift in enterprise conversations before. And the importance of it in terms of business strategy. If your business strategy is highly focused in AI and requires AI to derive a competitive advantage, then some of this infrastructure that you're thinking about is part of your competitive advantage. And that's a new thing for a chief strategy officer to be thinking through. Not new in the sense of never not to think about it, resources supporting their business strategy before, but it's a new resource that they're thinking about in general. So that's maybe one thing I'd add on the chip piece. On the new and exciting piece, maybe this would be a little bit different. Like I find I'm excited about what's going to happen with the form factors of how we engage with different versions of this device. Is like, is there another device around the corner? I know there's been a lot of work around from a vision perspective, and is glasses the right form factor? We carry around these odd bricks in our pockets that happen to be phones. Like, is that the right way that we're going to be engaging? And I do think there's a lot of interesting and novel kind of movement on that. Again, it'll take a while though for us to be able to deploy those and get them to scale at a real perspective. But I do think that's sort of the excitement. And the pace of change around the space, I think, is really exciting too, because there's just constant innovation here, pushing each other to think about well, how do I get around the fact that I'm GPU constrained? What are new ways I could design my models so they'd be faster without the GPUs I have today? How can they run faster on the edge with lower power, those types of capabilities? And so I think that kind of thing is something we should all be really excited about what's happening and then be real about what's the timeline to actually get it inside the enterprise.
Yeah, no,
One thing, Joe, I want to actually ask you something. Do you think the GPU constraints are a product of the moment we're in, where, there's a shortage of GPUs
Yeah.
relative to the demand for AI? Is that a trend that's perpetual? It's a question I get from a lot of my enterprise customers. Are GPUs going to be like CPUs in a couple of years, where you can basically spin them up whenever you want in whatever quantity you want, and in some sense, you can treat them as elastic and infinite on a lot of the clouds?
Yeah, I think it is, but the challenge is in the moment, if you're trying to drive a competitive advantage and don't have access to what you need, how do you innovate around that? So I do think there's a lot of innovation, as you mentioned, Amazon and Google and others, sort of Microsoft advancing the chip technologies. So I do think but the other piece is the demand's increasing so much that we don't have enough data centers to actually run all the things that we want to run too. So I think there's that challenge that we're facing out there.
yeah, and I just want to build on that on the point. So first of all, chip market is known to be notoriously cyclical. There's an element of that. I think the
Mhm.
other element is, and maybe something to be excited about, to Jim, your point, there's a lot of innovation happening and it's opening doors for new competitors. And even in the areas where we kind of assume that, well, these are the hyperscalers, like they dominate the market, we're seeing new entrants, whether coming as, maybe NVIDIA cloud partners, their companies partnering up with NVIDIA, stacking up GPUs, building data centers, and providing a very, let's say, limited set of services just focused on GPU consumption, which is, if you compare it to hyperscalers, this is like a single product, whereas GCPs and AWS of the world would offer a portfolio of services, right? But then there's a cost benefit associated with that. We're seeing some of the telecommunications providers looking at their data center footprint, especially with the elevated concerns around AI sovereignty, which we don't necessarily feel in the US, but once you step outside of the US, you start seeing that as a genuine concern across a large number of nations. Having a local champion that can provide compute becomes important for them, and that's creating opportunities for some new entrants, whether existing companies or net new entrants. So I think that's also opening doors, not in terms of just infrastructure, but how the infrastructure service is provided and by whom. So it's becoming an ever-shifting landscape. That's also a net new thing that I'm personally excited about.
As a matter of
And
fact,
the
we
cost
got the
profile.
Yes.
Oh, so but
go
I
ahead.
think interesting for you is like the cost profile, right? If things continue to get less expensive for us to run these, we can run more use cases. We can open up new value centers in the enterprise, and that does seem like a big part of the innovation that we're seeing in hardware too.
Barris, I'm curious for the net new providers as you think about that. Basically, same question I asked you, Jim. Like, is this a factor of the moment? It's something I think about a lot. Is this, there are GPU shortages, so anybody who can get their hands on GPUs can get into the market. But, for your customers, if the pricing were the same and the availability were the same and they had a choice between, say, AWS or Azure and one of these net new participants, my guess is they would choose AWS and Azure, all else being equal. Is that kind of a fair statement?
I mean, I think so. There's an element of fat catting happening, right? There's a new opportunity space at a bit of a gold rush. Some of these players won't be around, fast forward 3-4 years, but some may gain enough traction to establish themselves as key competitors. We'll see. But yeah, there's certainly an element of gold rush in terms of providing GPU capacity.
And Barris, is it fair to say we got a question from the audience on the you mentioned data sovereignty and investments that some governments are encouraging in data center build-outs. And the question there, the comment there, by the way, thank you very much for the question, is that these investments in local data centers that are intended to enable AI computation, there is obviously opportunity for global benefit, but is there actually a value to that local government in making such investments? Would there be value to these local governments in encouraging these kind of investments locally? And if so, what would that be?
Look, this is a really good question. If you think about the demand for GPUs, a lot of it was driven by training,
Mm-hmm.
at least initially. but a lot of the investments are being made with the expectation that inferencing would pick up, hockey stick trajectory, and all of this build out is really kind of being made with that type of projection in mind. So I think that the assumption, in any region of the world is there going to be a ton of demand for inferencing using data that the government or the companies within that region, for regulatory reasons or otherwise, would rather keep local. I don't think we're there yet, but that's the framework.
I feel like we're already there. Like with GDPR, we have data centers in lots of regions already. AI is simply another way of data processing, but even in the CPU and based world, data doesn't leave Europe unless you're under specific circumstances. Many of my customers, it's very important that their data stays in one region or one geo. So I think we're already there. And if you need your data to stay in one region, obviously you need GPUs in that region if you're going to do AI work.
In Europe,
Yeah, it makes sense. The other thing too is, I mean, even in the US, and you think about from a state's perspective of this as well, there's a lot of conversation about training and development of the workforce. And so I think there's also a degree of states saying, I want to become a center for AI. How do I attract AI talent? Now, you don't have to physically be next to the GPUs to attract talent, but the idea that, you've got a center for advanced computing, or you're building some of those capabilities, you have regulations friendly towards innovation, things of that nature that you want to try to market out to the group, I think is also part of some of these stories too that people are trying to drive.
I would be curious to know, Baris, Jim, your clients who are not in the business of AI, who are not technology companies making these gigantic bets. And I think like these are bets, but those who need to leverage, who are being asked by their boards, what are we doing on this? Are we going to be left behind? Can you share a little bit of what are those common concerns and questions? How should they be approaching this topic? The CIOs, the CTOs that you're interacting with. Like, what's the most burning topic of today, and what kind of perspectives are you sharing with them?
And maybe, Bears, I'll start maybe with the board perspective, and then we can sort of tag team on a few of these. And I'm sure Jonathan gets a bunch of these from different boards as well as he runs across this. I mean, so the question comes out a lot of, are we moving fast enough? So that's the big question. There's this fear of missing out in the marketplace because of all the news and all the stories that people are hearing. So one is, are we missing out? What's the pace that we're going at? Two, what's our AI strategy? And sort of a loose term of strategy, but what's our plan? Are we incorporating it internally? Are we trying to drive efficiency? Are we building AI into products? That's the other question that we get a lot because organizations are trying to figure out like what's the framework around that. And then the third, and not necessarily always in these orders, is what's our governance, risk, regulatory controls process around this? We have proprietary data. We want to make sure that we're doing things right by our customers and by our employees and by the regulators that we work with. So how are we ensuring the governance is going to be applied across the things that we're doing? So those come up a ton in our regular conversations, at least at the board level, and for the other guys and other ones that are seeing too.
I just want to add one more. Where is the value?
Yeah,
that's a very typical question.
Great point.
Initially, it was not the main question, but as time passes by, people are asking for our help to separate the wheat from the chaff, to say like, we have limited time, limited capacity, limited dollars to invest. Where should we make our bets? Yeah. That's another major theme that started surfacing over the past 6 months. Jonathan,
and I'd be curious too, John, as you think about this too, like some of the things we bump into is that we wanted to do X, but our data wasn't there, or like we couldn't, like we're struggling with like figuring out our data estate. I don't know if you guys bump into that a lot or not, or maybe it's just a lame excuse that that people are throwing out there.
I think it reflects the wrong philosophy about how to build AI systems. There's kind of two. I hear this story a lot, and especially being at Databricks, where I need to get my data organized. I need to turn my unstructured data into structured data. I need to clean up my tables. I need to, have better ETL, and then I can work on AI. But generally, we're still learning what AI can do with your data and what kind of data in what form you need it to be to make AI successful. What I typically tell my customers is figure out the use case, figure out what you want to do, try to build a system, figure out where your gaps are, and use that to motivate getting your data in order. You could spend the next 5 decades getting your data very neatly organized, only to find that actually you would have wished you had done something completely different to make use of AI. It's, it's the same simple advice I'm sure you all give all the time, work backwards from the outcome to what you need to do, and also be agile about it. Try to build an AI system, figure out the minimum amount of work you need to do with your data to get to the next milestone in AI and keep going. And it's, I hear this a lot, especially around Databricks, where, we love to help people get their data organized, but let AI and the use case be your guide in how to do that.
I love what you just said. Figure out what is the value and what is the outcome and work backwards towards it. Don't be confused by the cloud of options, possibilities, perceived threats, but be laser focused and move with intensity and right. I love that, Jonathan.
Just to add to that, I think there was a cycle of AI and analytics prior to Gen AI that started off with great ambitions, and they hit a kind of data governance, data quality wall, and a lot of organization got scarred from it. So it almost requires a little bit of re-education to focus on what you need, and in the context of generative AI, how much of your data, in what shape and format you need to manage just to deliver that use case and those business benefits you're looking for. Because when especially IT organizations go back to the executive leadership team or the CEO, and they say, hey, we need to start this big data governance and data lake formation journey. It sounds like a death march, and everybody got traumatized by some of the earlier attempts. And but following Jonathan's point, I think if you focus on the outcomes and understand how much of that you need to do, whether it's data governance, quality, or you just bring in your data together, just good enough is good enough to get this journey started.
I think that's interesting too. Like we're all sort of pulling these like historical examples of these things. So Jonathan, you're putting on sort of the mobile or edge examples, or they have AR, VR examples from the 90s and sort of what we expected to see later. I think this is the thing with some of this is that like 2 years ago, everyone sort of forgot some of these journeys that we were on around cloud and other transformations that we were doing and the lessons learned from them. And it's like, oh, well, AI showed up, so let's do a whole new, like, it's a whole totally different playbook. But the things that still matter in the scaling solutions, like having a change management program around this, like working from the problem back to figure out what you're trying to solve for versus just throwing technology at it, like still really much apply, I think, in everything that we're doing today with AI as we were doing, in prior years with cloud transformations or digital transformations, or pick your major transformation program.
Another comment that came through the audience is that this feels like a version of client server infrastructure re-emerging, but it's not client server, it's like edge cloud. And
I wouldn't call that re-emerging. I would call that, the history of computing going back to the dawn of time.
It's just swinging.
Yeah.
We like the history of computing is repeating the same lessons and the same architectures every 10 to 20 years, going back, to time immemorial. At least, that's what I read about in my history books. I'm sure the rest of us have as well. And that's what we should expect unless there's a good reason to see something otherwise.
Exactly. I was going to say a version of what you just said, going all the way back to mainframe computing and terminals, right? So what I would be curious to get your perspectives on is that on these two parallel and intertwined elements of the infrastructure, edge computing that will enable local AI calculation and cloud computing that will allow backend. What are your perspectives on what should we be expecting? If it's at all possible to give some assessment of where this is going, what might be things that we should be looking forward on both of these fronts over the next couple of years? And I'll maybe start by suggesting that discussion about form factor, I think, is really relevant for that edge computing. So where do you feel the edge is heading? What might be exciting things there that you are aware of? And a similar question, what might be exciting on the back end cloud enablement perspective?
Well, so maybe I should have said this before, but on the edge, you got the robots too. So we're getting into the zone of physical AI.
Yes.
Yep.
And we're already there with self-driving cars, which is like a robot on wheels, yes. Right? We're already there, and I think there's going to be very exciting developments in that space alone. And I would, I view this as a bit of a great alignment, right? For this space to actually become commercially feasible, you have to have a number of things in place. One is AI models need to mature, and then computer vision especially needs to mature. I think we're there now. Second, you have to have very strong compute on edge to suck all the information coming in from different sensors and be able to process it locally if that's required. We got that. Cloud, very mature now. You got sensor technologies, very mature. Robotics, the amount of dexterity we see now in robots, it was unthinkable, 5 to 10 years ago. And the connectivity, which could be Wi-Fi, 5G, or satellite. Now we're kind of blanketed with very strong broadband connectivity. If you put all these 5 things together, that's, in my mind, the great technology alignment that's enabling robotics. And I think we're going to see a lot of real life use cases, whether it's consumer focused or enterprise focused. I think that's going to be the big growth area from an edge and cloud joint.
So what I would extract from what you just said, Paris, is that never before have these 5, 6 forces converged and been capable to now interact collectively but independently of the back end. And therefore, we should be thinking of the edge computing as much bigger than a very powerful laptop or a very powerful workstation. That it now can take edge computing can take very different form factors from powerful glasses that will help you real-time guidance that you can see to the actual physical robots and other forms that may have not yet been invented. But this now gives a chance for that invention to happen, right?
Yeah.
So think of form factors way beyond a smart version of a phone or a smart version of a watch. It's a smart version of pretty much everything, and I think something yet to be discovered, obviously.
I'm gonna continue being the skeptic and give Barris a hard
Yeah.
time to keep the conversation interesting. I think all of this makes total sense. I can probably make you the counter case, which is we have Waymo cars, which are extraordinary. That cost $30 billion to develop and is now on the road in a handful of cities. And adding each new city requires a very detailed mapping of the city and a lot of practice. All of those trends can be in what feels like the right place. The technology also has to work, and people have to actually want the technology. I could probably make the same argument for you in spatial computing that, we have the connectivity, we have the compute, we have computer vision working. And how's the Apple Vision Pro doing?
Yeah.
People have to actually want this and there has to actually be use for it. How is Google Glass, which I think you could have made the same argument. We had exciting computer vision 10 years ago. Those are the ImageNet days. We had cloud computing, we had 4G. How did Google Glass do? So, with robotics, I love my robot vacuum cleaner. It's phenomenal. Robots have to actually work. It's great that all these trends, we can make that argument. I think we could have made that argument 10 years ago, and I think we could be able to make that argument 10 years from now. When the technology actually works and comes through, I do think we'll have robotics sometime in the future. In the same way we'll have, nuclear fusion sometime in the future. But trying to call the moment when that happens is exceedingly difficult. And a lot of capital has been burned calling the moment of AI or calling the moment of VR in the 90s or the 80s or the 2000s, calling the moment of robotics, what have you, calling the moment of quantum computing now. So I buy the logic. I don't buy I think the hypothesis, we could have made that hypothesis at many other points in time and it didn't end up panning out.
So Jonathan, are you more skeptical on the timing of all of these things? So you believe in sort of the path forward for these. It's just like, hey, it might be 10 more years when we actually see to get the
10
right
more years or 100 more years.
Yeah.
People were talking about exciting AI in the 50s and 60s. And we had, what was it, that famous chatbot? We had chess playing AI. And, AGI was right around the corner in 1960. Sometimes these things take time. And, sometimes the technology requires a really long time to mature. I feel very confident that in 100 years we'll have quantum computing robots on the moon. But the path there may not be quite so clean as, in fiscal year 2027, we'll see, household robotics really become a big breakthrough. In the same way, I don't think was anyone in this room predicting that large language models would be a big breakthrough that would come out in late 2022. I
Yeah.
certainly, and I don't think anyone else did.
No. Well, and I think what's helpful, like when we think about this from an enterprise perspective, is trying to link this back to like, strategic choices and options on these plays. So like as an enterprise, do you have to be worried about physical AI impacting your business with humanoid robotics next year? Probably not. But like, do you have to have a thought process around like, what's your AI infrastructure look like? What's your like, how are you thinking about hardware and investment? How are you thinking about innovation labs to test some of these new things out? I think are really important parts of like some of the stories that we're poking on. And like, yeah, like we're not quite sure where some of these things are going to land, but if we don't have a lab, or like, in a lab, right, light term in sort of the enterprise, like innovation center, a COE, pick your thing, to explore with the latest things that are coming from large language models, or a couple of interesting form factors for computer vision if it's applicable to our business. That's what like we try to end up encouraging folks on, because I agree with you. Like, yeah, picking the date. If we knew the date, we probably wouldn't be on a webinar right now. We'd be cashing in on some of our amazing predictions.
Yeah, and I want to make one point on this. It reminded me of my own cloud journey. I had a startup back in 2008. The first time we pushed code on AWS was 2009. And then when I joined my consulting practice with Deloitte, as I interacted with our clients, it felt like a travel back in time. Cloud was something that they had some kind of, let's say vague notion about. There was no roadmap. There was a little bit of excitement, some trepidations. And Jim, you've been part of this journey. It took probably mid 2010s or even further for like seeing widespread AWS adoption. And to me, it was something that I was doing back in 2009. So I think if you look at like 2 years, especially in the enterprise space, is too short a time. Like that's like your first 2-3 meetings, a couple of training sessions, maybe a bit of proof of concept to really get these things mature in the enterprise world. I think we're talking about 5 to 10 years at least, and it all depends on how kind of adventurous the enterprise is. But that's I think how all technology cycles start. 2 years is probably too short, but 10 years, you could see a major change. But to your earlier point, a lot of technologies that we had the same expectations and they vanished, right? So there's always that possibility. To Jim's point, we're not here in the business of predicting date, but I think we're in the business of like understanding the trends. That's at least how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, it's a journey, not a destination.
And Kelly, your team does a great job tracking the trends, then tracking our predictions against the trends. And there's been a few in there that we've ended up in the gutter on, like,
yeah,
maybe not the right pick.
You can't win them all.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what's fun about it, is trying to sit back and kind of look at some of the space and say, yeah, what might come next around the corner?
Yeah, totally.
On that front, I've been an enthusiastic follower of Deloitte tech trends for those last 16 years, and yes, there were some that did not translate into reality, but I would say the consistency of successful predictions is actually very strong, right? So Kelly, we are approaching the time. I just wanted to see, Kelly, based on your research and understanding of the trends, and given the conversation you've just heard, any sort of comments, any closing remarks you would like to share?
Well, I think today's discussion was great. I think, Jonathan, your pushback and your perspectives on kind of some of what we're talking about is wonderful, because I think it does challenge status quo. And I keep kind of coming back to the one common theme around like lead with need, right? So Barris, to your notion, I think there's so much we can do to push forward on what should be on edge, what shouldn't, what should we build versus buy. And I think really almost bringing it back to the basics, like what Jim said of, this isn't, transformational in and of itself. Like, let's figure out what's the need, what are we trying to solve, and how do we build towards that future, I think is where we're going to continue to see success versus doing technology for technology's sake. And so I think everyone is on this journey in some way, shape, whether they know it or not. And so whether you're going to be getting an AI embedded PC next, or you're going to be using GPUs in the future. I know we're all on this journey, but I think that lead with need is really important.
So lead with need be focused on the outcome and work backwards. Appreciate that the hardware part of development is now happening on two parallel fronts. There is hardware development that is quote unquote the edge, which means devices you will have in your hands or close to you, as well as devices that are going to be enabling cloud computing. The investment is in both of these directions. Nobody knows how will this play itself out. I think there is a consistent fear on the business side there's a fear of missing out on the business side, and there is probably equal amount of fear of being leapfrogged by those who are making these gigantic investments, right? Are we going to be leapfrogged by innovation that is coming out of the left field? I think, what happened with the AI models coming from China a month ago was, I think, one of those aha moments. Hold on for a second. So to me, those are the things that are probably defining this moment. And from the CIO's perspective, what would be the advice to the CIOs? And maybe what we should do is wrap this up by giving every one of you a chance to say, if you were in front of a CIO of a major global enterprise at this moment, at this morning or afternoon, what would be your advice to them on how to think and approach this question about hardware on AI? So maybe
I'll
can we
jump
start
in
with you, Jim?
I'll jump in and Jonathan will tell me my idea is bad, but we'll see how we go. I think for the CIO, it's stay connected to the ecosystem and be curious. Like you're going to learn a lot from that experience.
Very good. Yes.
I would say, sorry. I don't think hardware matters very much for the CIO. AI is like getting, CPUs or a SQL database. You can go to your friendly local cloud provider, you can go to your friendly local Databricks, and you can turn on AI like another resource that you can turn on elsewhere. The hardware doesn't matter. Let someone else worry about the hardware. You focus on what you're trying to do with this very interesting, very powerful, and deeply flawed new technology. Focus on wrapping your head around the technology, no more than you should focus on, like, does AWS have the latest Intel CPU or the latest AMD CPU, or do they have an ARM CPU? You don't care. You just care that they have flops and you can do interesting things and deploy services on those flops. Let abstraction boundaries be abstraction boundaries and build on top of them. Don't get wrapped up in them. I think the edge versus like data center conversation and is it going to be NVIDIA or Trainium? I think those are huge distractions for a CIO. Hardware will figure itself out. Intelligence is a service you turn off and on, and you should figure out what to do with it.
Well, I listened to Jim and Jonathan carefully and managed to agree with both of them. I really don't have much to add. I think Jonathan is right. Obviously, you have to start with the business problem to solve, and infrastructure is something that enables that. But I also agree with Jim that the space is evolving fast, and as a CIO, you're also the technology advisor to the rest of the organization, and being at the edge of things and being up to speed. And so, even if it's to kind of reduce confusion in the organization and get them focused in the right places, having an well-educated CIO across all dimensions of the stack, whether it's software, hardware, et cetera, it's really important in my opinion. So agree with both.
Thank you. Kelly, take us home.
No, I think they've all said it. There's nothing better that I could say. So we can, unless you have anything you want to wrap us up with, Dalibor, I think we're good.
Well, I want to thank everybody very much for your time and for your wisdom. This was excellent conversation. And Jonathan, thank you actually for grounding the conversation down into, as you express it, the reality of focusing on really what matters and being laser intent to deliver it and working backwards. I would like to thank you very much for joining us today, and to remind the audience that our next Tech Trend session, where we're going to be unpacking AI and tech talent and the interplay between tech talent, people who work in technology, and AI, we will be unpacking that on Tuesday, March the 18th. So please visit TechTonic Conversations or my LinkedIn posts and register for that session. With that, I'd like to wish you all a wonderful Tuesday and see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.